In this video, we will learn about HTTP in React. So what's the purpose of HTTP and why do we need it? We have all used a lot of applications like Gmail, Facebook, wherein from our browsers, we open the Gmail app and it goes and fetches our emails and displays that to us. So this application has two parts. It has a front end and a back end. What is the front end? The front end is what we see in the browser and what we use in our browser. And the back end, which is also referred to as a server, is where the data is stored. Now the front end fetches data from the back end by calling the backend services or API of the server. So it makes a request to the backend. So the front end makes a request to the backend, and the backend responds to the requests sent by the front end and sends the requisite data. So when I log in, it will validate, it will tell me whether my login was correct or not. Then it will get my emails in the case of a Gmail. So all that data is saved on the backend, stored on the backend, and the front end has requested it, and the response it gets from the backend is what it displays. The protocol that we use here is known as HTTP for this data transfer. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and that is what we use. And the API is, or the definition of the services that the front end is calling, is referred to as API or Application Programming Interface. What does API or Application Programming Interface mean? It defines the kind of requests that can be made. So it will tell us what kind of requests we can make from the front end, how do we make those requests, what form in data in which form can we send the data, and in which form can we receive the data. So it basically tells us what we can expect of the server and how should we use it. So this is the basic structure of a front end and a back end application. Now, how do we use HTTP in React? We know that React is a lightweight library for building UI, and React does not have a HTTP library built into it. But there are many popular libraries available that we can use with React. Some of them are Fetch, jQuery, AJAX, and Axios. And in this lesson, we will use Axios, which is one of the most popular libraries used with React. And before using Axios, we'll need to install it. And the way to do that is npm install Axios. So go ahead and install Axios. Once you have installed Axios, we need to also install our server, which will respond to our requests that our front end or our React application will send. For that, there are a few steps involved. First, we will need to install something called Express. So just go ahead and install it, npm install Express. Then there is a server file which has been shared in the description. So download that the server file, and copy it in the folder that has the file package.json. Once you have copied it, then run the server file with the command node and the file name of the server. So here in our VS Code, we would now need two terminals. Why do we need two terminals? The first terminal is running the React code, the React server with the npm start. We would need the second terminal to run our server. So let's just go ahead and create a new terminal with this plus sign. And this should take us to the same directory where our package.json is there. And here we have a server file. So let's just run it, node server lesson http.js. And once it runs, we'll just get this message, node app listening on port 2410. So we have successfully started our server. Once we have started the server, let's just test it and see if it's running properly. So what we will just go to the browser and go to these URLs, localhost:2410/product-app/products and localhost:2410/product-app/products/837. So here when I go to slash product app slash products. It sends me some data which seems fine, and if I go to 8 to 7, I also get a response. So the server seemingly is working fine. Now that we have ensured that our server is working fine, we will now get down to creating the app which will work with the server. Before that, we just need to understand one more concept which is known as REST APIs. We learned that APIs is the way we will communicate with the server, and what we use here are a specific form of APIs which are known as REST APIs. And these REST APIs have 4 prominent ways of using them, which is get, post, put, and delete. We will make a get request when we want to fetch data from the server for a specified resource. So when we want to get all the data of the products or the details of a specific product, we will make a get request. Post is to send data to the server to create a resource. So typical use cases, suppose we want to add a new product. That's when we will use post. Put is used to update a resource. Typical use cases, if we want to edit a product or something, which is where we are updating it, we will use put. And delete is used to delete a resource. The most commonly used of this are get and post, and which is what we will focus on in this video. So here are products app API that we are starting to work with. Let's start with the get requests. We know get requests requests data from the server for the specified resource. And the way we will do it is we'll make a get request to slash products app slash products. And obviously the URL before that, which is localhost:2410. So that is the base URL. And within that, we will make a request to this and get the data of all the products as an array. Similarly, to get the details of a specific product, we will make a request, a get request to slash products app slash products slash :ID, where ID is the ID of the product. And this will send us the data for the product whose ID has been specified, and it will send that data in the form of a JSON. So now that we have understood so much, let's start using it and it will become much clearer. So let's do the example. Fetch data for all the products from the server and display it. And the API to use is the get slash products app slash products. And obviously our base URL here is the localhost:2410. So here in our React app, we just have a skeleton navbar and a main component. And if we just go ahead and run it, we have my portal with products and add product. And what we want to do is that when we go to products, we should be able to fetch from the server all the details of the products and display them. So here in our products component, we want to fetch all the details from the server and display them. So for that, we will need to make an HTTP request to the get using get to the URL we had specified. So let's define how do we make an HTTP request in a separate file, HttpService.js, wherein we will put all that code and then use it in products. So in HttpService.js, let's just import Axios from Axios. So if you have not installed Axios so far, just first ensure that you have installed Axios because we will be using it. Then let's define const base URL, which is our base URL for all our requests, which is http://localhost:2410. Remember to put HTTP here because that specifies how we want to use it. Next, let's define a function, say get, which takes a URL and which will just return Axios.get base URL plus. So that's the URL we want to fetch it from. and let's just export this function, export default. Now this is our simple HTTP service that we have created. It's a bare bones service, and let us now use it in products. The first thing we will need to do it is import, and let's call it say HTTP from dot HTTP service. Once we have imported it, we will need to fetch the data. Now, where should we fetch the data? Should we fetch it in render? Render is not the right place to fetch the data because that's where we are just displaying it. And let us also understand how the data will be fetched. We will make a request. So, make a request to the server. The server will then compute the response. And then it will send back the response. So notice that this step will take some time. So which is why we will use asynchronous responses here. So the first thing we will do is we will use ComponentDidMount. Now ComponentDidMount is a part of the life cycle of the component, and when this component is getting mounted, that is when this function is called. So in that we will issue a request to get the data. So ComponentDidMount, and what can we say here? We can say let response is equal to HTTP.get, and we can get our URL, which is /product app /. Now, as we discussed earlier, this request is an asynchronous request because it will take some time. So we will wait for that response by putting an await here, and we will decorate this function with a person. Now, once we get the response, let us just do a console.log response. Let's go ahead and test this. So here you can see we have gotten a response. Data is array 8, and if I get into the data, I get the responses for all the data that we wanted. So this is the array of that the server has sent us. It has other fields like status, status text, headers, which we will be using later, but not in this lesson. In this lesson, we are just concerned with the data. So once we get the data, I can just say let data is equal to response. So we can destructure response from here. And now we will just set it in the state so that we can then use it in our render. So here we can just say state and let's define products is equal to an empty. So initially products in state is an empty array. Now we need to update it. We can follow two ways to update it. One is the standard process that we have been following, which is make a copy of the state, this dot state. Then we can say s1 dot products is equal to data, and then we can say this dot set state s1. This is the standard way that we have been doing so far, and there is another way to do it, which is what we will use here now. So instead of just saying here, we want to update the products JSON. And what is the value we want to give it? We want to give it the value data. So we can just say products colon data. So this JSON in this field in the states JSON will get updated with this value, which is what we wanted. So this is a shorter way to do it. So now once we do it, the data would be set in our products. Let's just go ahead and test it again. So here in our components, if I go to products, I can see in the state we have all the data which has been set. So now that the data has come to the state, we can just render it the way we have been rendering it. So I'll just use a standard code that we had used earlier, and we will just render it. So we just pick the products from the state and just render it in a table. So let us go ahead and test it. So now on the products page, we get all that information that we got from the server, and we have displayed it successfully. So let's just recap our steps. So first we created this HttpService.js. We imported it in our products. Then in our component did mount, we made a network request, an HTTP request, got the data and set it in our state. And then as we have been doing it, we just use the state to render it. Let's look at the next example. Fetch data for the product whose ID is specified from the server and display it. API to use get /products/products/:ID. So now in the product, we need to use it. So let's go back and use it. So here we have product.jsx, which is very similar to that, but here we want to display the details of a single product. Now how do we reach here? We will reach here using the route /product/:ID. So what do we need to do here? We will follow the same steps. First, let's import HTTP from HttpService. Next, how do we get this data? Again, we will do ComponentDidMount. In that ComponentDidMount, what do we need to do? We will need to get the data from the server. So let response is equal to http.get. Now in the get, the path or the URL will be product app/product/ we need the ID. So how do we get the ID? We will use the route parameters for it. So we can just say let ID is equal to this dot props dot match dot. So standard routing, we will get that response. Now we know this is asynchronous, so let's put an await and decorate this function with an async. Now that we have gotten the ID, let's just put the ID here. We'll use a little template ID, and let's just log the console.log. Let's call it say product comma response. Let's test it. So here in the products, if I click on say A237, you can see we have gotten this product. Again in the data, we have the data and the other requests are there. So we'll use the same thing. Let's destructure it. Let data is equal to response, and we will set it in the state again. So state so we will use the technique we used for the set state. Which JSON do we want? Product to be updated with. So that is what we have set. So this should update the state with the product data. So next we just need to render it. So we have just put in a standard way to render it. We've taken it from the state and we have just rendered the ID, name of the product and the price. Let's go ahead and test it. So if I click on A237, we get all those details. we click on P035, we get those details, and you can see here also we are getting those details from the server. So here we have used that to fetch data from the server and display it. And what are the steps? The steps are the same. We imported HTTP from HttpService. In the ComponentDidMount, we made a request, a GET request, got the response, set it in the state, and then just rendered it using the state. So far, we have used the two GET APIs for the products app. Let's now look at how do we create a new product. So for that, we need a post API. Recall that a post is used to send data to the server to create a resource. And here the API is post/products/app/products. So we will make a request to this URL, and the data to be sent to the server is stored in the body of this request. So that is how we will use a post. And let's look at an example where we will see how to learn it, how to use it. When the submit button of the add product is clicked, send the data of the new product to the server and then navigate to /products. API to use here is post/products/products. So here we have our add product, which is a form which just shows a simple form, and the values are stored in the state. So it has our handle change, it has a handle submit, and it's a standard form with the text fields. We just go ahead and see it. It's a standard form. Now what do we want to do? When the submit button is clicked, we want to use the API to send this data to the server and then locally go to /products and fetch the new data and show it. The first thing we will need to do, we have not defined a post in our HTTP service. So in our HTTP service, let's define a post function post. It takes a URL and it takes an object, the data it needs to send, and it will just say return Axios.post, again base URL plus URL, that's the URL we want to post at, and the object we want to post. We will also export our post function. Once we have done this, let's go to our add product and import HTTP from HttpService. Now in our handle submit, this is where we will need to call our function. So how do we do that? Here we can just say, let's say we define a function post data, which takes a URL and an object. And what does it do? Let response is equal to http.post, and we send it the URL and the object. Now note, this function will also be an async function because the data will be sent to the server will process it and then send a response. So we will put an await and decorate this function with async. Once we get the response, what should we do? We can just, we really don't need to do anything with the response. We can just log it if we choose to see it, console.log response, and here we can just go to this.props.history.push /products. So to display all the products, we will just route locally. So once we have done this, here we can just call this.post data. What is the URL? /product/app/products. And what is the data? The data will be this.state. So this is what we can do. Now let's go ahead and test it. So let's say our product ID is test1, product name is test prod 1 and price is 101. Let's click on submit. So now here we can see that now the data that we have received from the server has 9 elements. Earlier it had 8, and if we go into the data, it also has this. So what happened? From the add product, we made a request to the server, and the server now added it in its backend. Then when we went to products and we made a request for /products, it sent us all these details. If I go back again and make another product, say test2, test2222, and price say 2. Now here it shows us 10 products and we can see it in the response also. So this is working fine. Now these network requests, these HTTP requests and these responses, there is another way to inspect them and see them. So for that we have the networks tab in our inspect. So we will go to our networks tab in inspect in Chrome browser. It will display all the network requests with their corresponding response, and this is a very powerful way to debug HTTP or network related issues. So let's just have a look at it. So here if I go to my network, you can see a lot of requests have been made. Let me just first clear it and let's see. If I go to an add product, and now if I go to products, I get a request here, product. We made a request here, and you can see what request we made. We made a get request to http://localhost:2410/product app/products. So it tells us about it. It also shows us the response. So the data in the response, we can see it here. Similarly, now if I go to add product and say put a product test3, it shows me 2 requests here. Let me go to the second one. So the second one, it's a post request that we have made, and it gives me the details of those post requests. And here in the payload, we can see the JSON that it sent. So this also tells us that, and the response is exactly the same product that came back. Then we made another request to get, because we got routed in the navigation to /products. We got that data, and in the response we got all these details, including with the test3. So whenever you are using it, you can continuously use it. So we can also say, now if I want to go to this test3, I make this request http://localhost and finally test3. It's a get request, and in response I just got the JSON for this object. I can go to products back and say I want to get it for say A237. You can see that we are being able to get it. So this is a very, very powerful tool, and just make yourself very comfortable and familiar with it. And this, along with our console.log, is a very, very important way to debug network issues. So we used our API for our products app. Now, is there a way to test an API? So what we saw in the network tab is using a React application, but to understand an API, test it, is there another way to do it? So we have a popular API client called Postman that makes it easy to create, share, and test APIs. It also allows users to create and save HTTP requests and read their responses. And what you should go is go to postman.com and download and install Postman. So here I have Postman running. So we will just go to get, create a request. So here let's enter a request. So what was the request we were making? Local host :2410/product app slash products. Let's send this request, and you can see we have gotten all the response that we wanted. So, and it's giving us it's showing us the data. We can also save this request. So let's just go to save, create collection, let's call it product app, and save to product app. So now you can see we have gotten this first request. So I can run it as many times I can save it. Let's add the other API that we had. So we had http://localhost /product app /products / the ID, say 8. So now when I send it, I can see that response here again. So let's save this. So these were our two APIs. So whenever we want to run it, we can test it here. Another advantage we get here is we can create a post type of an API also. So I can say post, what is my URL? Localhost /. This is my URL. Now in a post to test it, in the body we will need to send data. So we will click on raw here, and the format of our data is JSON. Now what is the JSON we were sending? We were sending ID. Let's say the ID we want to send is test4. The name of the product is test4444, and the price is 444. Now if I send it, I get an error. So one thing you need to take here is in the JSON that you send here, while testing it in Postman, the field names should be in quotes. So let's do that, and now let's send it, and we have gotten that response. Let's save this also API, and now if I go to this API and edit it and say the product we wanted was a test4, it's not found. What did we send here? Test space 4. So we get that product. So this is a very, very powerful way. Whenever you get an API, first test it on Postman, understand it. It will give you a way to understand it, and then you can debug a lot of issues here. So the issues that you get from your React code, you should use the network tab that we set and the console.log. And for understanding the API, use Postman to understand the APIs and see how to use them. The data structures you want to send, the way you want to send the data, the way you want to construct the URL, everything can be done very powerfully using Postman. Let us look at the next exercise. Create a person app to show the details of persons. And we will use the REST API get /person app /persons question page is equal to page now to get the details of the persons. And the base URL is http://localhost:2410. So whenever we are to solve these kind of problems, the first thing we will do is we will just run this API in our Postman and see the output. So let's go to Postman, and here let me create the http://localhost:2410/person app /persons. Let's send it. So remember, before you send it, that the server should be working in your VS Code. If not, just ensure that you have typed in that command node with the name of the file. So here we can see the structure of this output. So it has a start index, which is giving us 1, and end index, the number of items, and then it has an array named persons, and it has these 5 elements in it. So every time it's returning 5 elements, and I did not specify a page number here, so it returned me the first page. If I now, as it said, changed it to page is equal to 2, it's now given me the item start index 6 to 10. The number of items have remained the same, and it has sent me the next 5 items. So this is how this API is working. So what this Postman has given us is given us a way to run the API and see the kind of output the API is giving. Having understood this, let us go down and write our code in VS Code. So like we did in our previous exercise, we have created this file HttpService.js, wherein we have exported our get and post, and we have put in our base URL, and this is the file we will use, and these are the methods we will use for fetching data. So let's go to our persons and let's import HTTP from HTTP service. Next, what do we want to do? We will need to fetch the data to display it in our render. Where will we fetch our data? We will fetch our data in ComponentDidMount. So here we can say let response is equal to HttpService.get, and we need to give the URL, so which will need the page number. So let's first get the page number. So let query params is equal to query string dot parse this dot props dot location dot search. So we will get our query params. Once we get our query params, let's destructure page, let page, and if it's not there, let's initialize it to 1 is equal to query params. Once we have done it, let's get our URL slash person app slash persons question mark page is equal to $page, and we need to put an await here. So let's just put the await and decorate this by person. Once we have done it, once the response comes, let's just console it. So console.log response, and then we will need to put it in the state. So let's define the state. State is equal to, and here in the state, remember we had what all we were getting? We were getting start index, end index, number of items, and we were getting the persons. And this will all come in a structured data. So let's just initialize data here to be an empty JSON. Let's destructure data from the response. So let data is equal to response, and we can just do this dot set state data is. So our data field will get updated with this data that we received from the HTTP. Once we have done that, let's go to our render. So in our render, let's first destructure. So const, and these are the fields, is equal to this dot state dot data. Note persons is an array where we will run a map. So let's initialize it to an empty array so that when we run it, it does not get an undefined. So remember this. This is very, very important. Once we have gotten it, let's just go to our render and render it. H4 list of persons, H6 showing start index to end index of number of items. Then let's just use map to create a table on persons.map, and it is for this reason that we had initialized it to an empty array. PR goes to div class name is equal to row, and within this we'll show the values. So div class name is equal to column 2, let's say PR dot height. Let's show the other fields: name, age, city, company, and we should have put in a border here. So let's just copy it. So we have shown our details. So let's test it so far and see whether this is working. We get this warning: each child in a list should have a unique key property. We did not give it, so let's give it. Key is equal to br dot. Let's test it again. So now this is the data we received. And that is what we have shown. So start index 1, end index 5 of 52, and we have shown those details. Now we need to paginate it, so we'll need to show the next and the previous buttons. So let's show that. Div class name is equal to row. Now when do we need to show the previous? When if start index is greater than 1, which means there are values to previous, then we will show previous, otherwise we will show a empty. So if this is the case, let us show a button. And what do we show here? Previous. This is the button we show here. And what do we show on its link? On click is equal to this dot handle page, let's call it. And because this is previous, let's give it the value -1. So it will call a page which is -1. Similarly, let's put it in for our next. When do we want to show the next? When if end index is less than number of items. So if end index is less than number of items, which means there are more items to show, and we will show handle page 1 and say all this next. So now once we have done that, we need to implement our handle page. So let's define our handle page is equal to, it gets the increment. And what does it do? It should use programmatic navigation to call the URL. So we need to construct it. So we'll first need to get the page number. So I can just get the page number from here. Let new page is equal to plus page plus inquiry. So depending upon the page number that we have, we will get the new page. So once we know the new page, we can just say query params dot page is equal to new page, and we will, like we have been doing earlier, we will just say this dot call URL. What is the URL we want to call? Slash persons with the query parameters. This is the standard routing we have been using. So here we are, remember here we are using routing, the React routing. We are not calling the network. So we will route the app to slash persons question mark the next page. So for that, what have we been doing? So we will use the same process that we have been following. So let's define the function call URL is equal to, it takes URL and options, and what does it do? Let search string is equal to this dot make search string with options. So we create the search string given the options, and then we just call the URL this dot props dot location dot push. Path name is URL and search is search string. So that's the standard we have been doing. So let's just keep on following that standard. So we need to make this function, create this function, make search string is equal to, it takes the options. Now what are the options here? We just have page. So let page is equal to options. Let search string is an empty string. Then we will say search string is equal to this dot add to query string, and we pass it the search string, the name of the parameter and its value, and then we return search string. So this is the standard process we have been following, and now we need to define add to query string. Add to query string, it takes three parameters, a string, a param name, and a param value. And what does it do? If param value is truthy, then we will see whether the string is truthy. If the string is truthy, what do we return? It's and this, then an ampersand, and then dollar param name is equal to param value. And if str is falsy, we don't need to put this ampersand or the str, so we will just say this. And if the param value was falsy, we will just return the str. So we don't need this braces. So this is our add to query string. So now the handle page should work. It should get routed to that location. Let's test it out. So let's click on next. Next is giving an error. We made an error here. It should not be location.push. It should be history.push. So where was that? All this dot props dot history dot push. Let's test it again. So now we are getting page is equal to 2, which is fine. But notice this data has not gotten updated. Now why has that happened? So here, where are we fetching the data? We are fetching the data in ComponentDidMount, but because we are in the same component, this function did not get called. So how do we handle this problem? We will use another of the component lifecycle, which is ComponentDidUpdate. So whenever a component is updating, it calls this function and it passes two parameters to it: previous props and previous state. They refer to the previous props and the previous state of this component before the update. So here we will check whether the props have changed or not. Now, how would the props have changed? Because in the props, the search would have changed, the location.search would have changed. So we can just say if previous props not equal to this dot props, then what we will do? We will just call our function. So let's push this into a function. So let's move that into another function. So let's define a function fetch data and move all this code there. And because there is an await there, this is the function that gets decorated with async. We remove the async from here. And what do we call here? This dot fetch data. Same thing we do in our component did update. This dot fetch data. So what does it mean? It means fetch the data again. So if the previous props is not equal to this dot props, and this is extremely important, otherwise it will keep on making these calls. And let's clear this. Now when I click on next, it has fetched that data, you can see. So 6 to 10 of 52, 11 to 15, 16 to 20. So the next is working fine. Same for the previous, and let's go till the extreme end. And this is also working. So we have now fetched the data and we are now using that. So important thing we learned also here was this need for component did update and the comparison of the previous props with the props. So this is extremely important. Let's look at the next part of the exercise. In the person app, show the details of a specified person. Use the RESTful API get slash person app slash persons slash colon ID. So that is how we fetch the details of a specified person and show that. So the first thing we will do is check it in Postman. So here we had that. Okay, let's first save this one. So create a collection. Let's call it say person app. And let's create another. And I will just copy this part. And here we are saying persons slash and any ID. Let's say one was an ID. So one was an ID, so we get the details. So we just get a JSON here with the details here. So that's how it works. If we wanted to check it for the other, say 16. Let's try it for 16. So we get those details. So ID, name, age, city, and company. So here in our main component, it's getting routed to the component person. So let's go to the component person. We will import HTTP from HttpService. Now the first thing we need to do is fetch the data. So let's just say ComponentDidMount. Let response is equal to HttpService.get, and here we will pass that URL slash person app slash persons slash. We need the ID, so let's first get the ID. Let ID is equal to this dot props dot match dot parents. So we get the ID, so we can just fetch the data. And we need to put an await here and decorate it with. Once we have done that, let's console.log response, and we need to put it in our state. So let's define state. Let state is equal to person question mark to a colon. It's an empty object. So now what can we do? We can just let data is equal to response, and we can just do this dot set state person. The field person gets the value data, so it gets updated with data. Once we have done it, we can just go ahead and render it. So let's call the structure const person is equal to this dot state, and here we can just show it h4 details of the person, ID is person dot ID, let's put a break, name, age, city, company, and this should print. Let's go ahead and test it. So for testing it, we would need some way to call it. So let's make in the list of persons, let's make this clickable. Let's put a link there. So let's go ahead in our ID, put in a link. And what should be the 2 here? 2 is equal to slash persons slash pr dot. So that should be our link. Let's go ahead and test it. So if I click on 1, so I get the details of 1, but it is not showing us the details here. Let's look at our network. What do we get in our network? So we get page is equal to 1, and here we can see that no call was made. Let's go ahead and check why that happened. So we wrote async component did update. No, it should have been async component did mount. So it's on a mount that we are putting it here. So this error helps you clarify that, because whenever this component is getting mounted, we wanted that. So the first time it would be component did mount. So let's go ahead and test it now. Let's go to all persons. Let's refresh it. In the network, we get that. Now if I click on 1, I get the details for Jackson. If I click on say 6, I get the details for 6. So here, because in the first time in the component lifecycle, it will only call component did mount. So that was the error. The moment we corrected it, this is working. Let's look at the next part of the exercise. In the person app, add the details of a new person. Use the REST API post slash person app slash persons, and a sample JSON has been given, and the fields that will go here are name, age, city, and company. Note, we are not sending the ID. So the first thing what we will do, we will just test it in our Postman. So here, let me save the previous one also. And now what do? We will create another API. This will be of post type. This will be the URL, and what's the body? Raw JSON. So we just said name is equal to say Joe, age is equal to say 33, city is London, and company is. So this is the JSON we will test out, we will send. But in our Postman, this will not work. Why will this not work? Because these need to be in quotes for them to work in Postman. So let's just do that. And let's just send this data. So once we send it, we get an error. Why are we getting this error? The error was because we did not put a comma here. So do not make those kind of errors. Let's send it again. And this time it's worked perfectly fine. And the response has the ID there. We don't need it, but just for our reference. So again, we made that error, and that's why Postman did not work. But the moment we fixed it, it's working. So this is our API. Once we have done this, let's go ahead and write our code. So in our main component, it gets routed to add person. And in the add person, we have just created a simple form, wherein in our state, we have this JSON person with name, age, city, and company. The list of the cities to be shown as drop down, the list of the array of companies to be shown as a drop down. Now, what do we want to do? We need to handle the submit. So, at the handle submit, we will need to post that data. So, let's create a function. And before that, what do we need to do? We will need to import HTTP from HttpService. Let's do our post data. It takes a URL and it will take an object. And what will it do? It will say let response is equal to http.post URL comma object, and we need to put an await here and decorate it with cursor. Once we have done this, let's just console.log response, and once the response has come, we can just route ourselves to this dot props dot history dot push. Where do we want to go? Slash. That's where we want to go. And here we can just call this dot post data. What is our URL? Slash person map slash persons. And what is our object? This dot state dot. So let's go ahead and test it now. If I go to add a person, let's enter a name, say Joe, age 30. We already did that. Let's put another name. Test 33, age 34, select city, let's say Paris, select company, let's say Facebook. And let's clear this. So when we submit it, this is the request that went in. Let's just have a look. So we sent a post request, and this was the data we sent. And what did the response say? the response gave us back a JSON. So this is working fine. If we go to our persons here, we are seeing 54. Why 54? Because 53rd is what we put in from our Postman, because the server is continuously running, and this one is the 54th that we put in. So the add is also worked for. Let's look at the next exercise. Add a left panel to take the city, company, and minimum age as input. Fetch the details of the persons that match the criteria. The REST API to use, get /persons, person app /persons, and the query parameters it has are page, min age, city, and company. Page, you remember, we have already used it, but now it also supports query parameters min age, city, and company. And city and company can have multiple comma separated values. And a sample has been given us /person app /persons page is equal to true, and city is equal to London Paris, and company is equal to Apple Google, and min age is equal to 25. So let's just copy this and we will use this in our Postman. So let's go to our Postman. Let's first save this. Now in our Postman we had made that get request for page. Let's change it, and instead of that, let's put this request in. And before it should have here localhost colon 241. Let's send it, and it gets us a response. So start index is 6, end index is 7, number of items is 7, and it gets us these persons. If we set page 1, it would have gotten us the similar details. So this is how this API works. So let's go ahead and implement it now. So what we have created here is a component options CB to show the left panel. And as we have been doing so far, so if we just go through the code, we have a function make dropdown, which makes a dropdown given the array to show the value, the name, and the label. Similarly, we have for checkboxes. And then what do we do here? We do our render. So in our render, we are showing checkboxes for cities, we are showing checkboxes for companies, and we are showing a drop down for min age. And in the props, we are getting cities, companies, and ages. These are the arrays that we are getting, which we are using to show these boxes. And we are also getting the props. In the props, we are getting props.options, which has all the cities, company, and min age, which have been selected so far. And in our typical way, in our handle change, because city and company are checkboxes, so we are checking whether the input.name is city or company, and then handling that update CVs because multiple checkboxes need to be handled. And otherwise, we are just using a standard options input.name is equal to input.value. And with every option change, we are just calling this.props.on option change. So the three props it needs is on option change, it needs the options, and it needs the three arrays from the persons. So let's go ahead and use it in persons. So import options CB from option CB, and let's go ahead and put a row here. If class name is equal to row, if class name is equal to column 3, and if class name is equal to column. and here let's just go ahead and so now in the column 3 div we will just call our options CB. Now what all do we need to pass as props? So one props we need to pass is here in our state. Let's just create values for all the cities. We had that in our add person, so let's just copy that. And then we had the data for ages. Let's put it. So 25, 30, 35. So once we do that, let's go down here. Now what all do we want to show here? So let's first destructure. So const cities, companies, ages. That's the name. Let's check it. Cities, companies, ages is equal to this dot. We also need to know the options, so we can just say let query params equal to query string dot parse this dot props dot location dot search, so that we get the current query params. Once we have gotten it, let's just pass them here. So options is equal to, what will it be? Query params. Cities is equal to cities. Companies is equal to companies. What is the name for ages? It's ages only. Ages. And then we need on option change. Is equal to this dot handle option. So this is the structure we need to create. Let's see whether it's working fine so far. So here we can see we have gotten that structure. We are getting the checkboxes, the drop downs, and this. Let's just put these slightly better. Age, let's make it 1. So this is looking better. Now what do we want to show here? This should have come inside. Let's correct that also. This part of it, we want it. So this is looking much better. Now what do we want to do? We need to implement our handle option change. Handle option change is equal to, it gets the options. And what does it need to do? It will need to just call our URL, this dot call URL slash persons with the options. Once it does that, we know how to handle it because we have handled it earlier. So they should work fine for us. Let's test it. So if I click on London, this dot props dot on option change is not a function. Let's check it out. What's the issue? And on option change, and they should have been handle option change. That's the name we gave below. Let's test it out again. Now if I click on London, Again, they should have shown London here. It's not showing it. There is still some problem. Let's check it. So what is the problem now? The problem is that in a make search string, we had only handled page. We did not handle the other options. So let's handle them now. City, company, and min age. And we will just add it to our search string. So this should fix this issue. Let's go ahead and test it again. So now if I click on London, we can see city is equal to London. But in the data that we are fetching, we don't seem to be getting that because we're getting the same value. Let's see what's the request URL is still question mark page is equal to 1. So that's our error. Let's go back and see. So where are we calling that? We are calling it in fetch data. And what are we doing? In fetch data, we are using this approach. So instead of that, what should we do? We should just make our search string and call it with our search string. So let's say let search string is equal to this dot make search string query params. And here we can just append our search. So that was the error. We were just sending the page number. Let's test it again. So now if I click on London, we get 1 to 5 of 21 and all these are London. If I say London and Apple, and we can see here in the request, that's the request we are making. So we get 1 to 5 of 7. If we do that, this seems to be working fine. Let's set a minimum age of 30. So that makes it 6 to 10. If we change the minimum age to 35, fine. We add Facebook, Microsoft. There is one problem here. We are not resetting the page number, which we should do whenever the option has changed. Let's make that change also. So here in our handle options change, we can just say options dot page is equal to. Now let's test it. So London, Paris, Apple, Google. If I go to next, and now if I add Facebook, we start from the first page. And this seems to be working absolutely.